All right. Well, good evening. My name is Isaiah Shaw. I know some of you. Some of you have not had the pleasure to meet yet in person. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening with you. I would like to go over my view as far as timber harvest stages and process. A little bit about our background. Logging has been the pillar in our family since 1956. We've always strived to maintain our values, honor, and integrity within the logging community, placing environmental protection at the top of our list. We believe in shaping your forest into a sustainable asset that can be managed and preserved for future generations. Now, most of you here, from what I know, have somewhat of medium to large tree farms. And what I'm going to talk about here might be geared towards someone setting up a new farm. And some of the options that I usually present to people when I'm approached about this would be consulting with your stewardship forester. The ones that we work with primarily here in Yamhill County, Brent O'Nien, I'm sure most of you are familiar with him. He's been a wonderful forester. I absolutely love working with him, especially in this county, and he sometimes extends out to other counties. But highly recommend consulting with him or another stewardship forester in your district. A lot of times people don't really understand what type of trees that they should be planting for specific zones, as well as the quantity of trees per acre. Understanding your crop, having zones specifically dedicated to merchantable timber, and even some that are non. And we have a small tree farm out in Newburgh, my grandparents do. And there's a few places out there that do not grow Doug fir in a sustainable practice. So we have geared some of those areas towards Willamette Valley pine, Ponderosa pine, Austrian pine, and most of those will meet the criteria for your timber deferral. And we're very, very happy to see a tree planted wherever a tree can grow instead of having just bare ground for blackberries to grow and invasives. So that's pretty important part of our approach to tree farming. I think another portion of your crop maintenance, as far as the spraying would go, the first 3 years of a tree's life are the most important. In my experience with trying to grow in the Yamhill area, I've had a lot of issues with Scotch broom, thistle, and Himalayas. And I've always contracted my spraying out since I'm not a licensed applicator. And as far as working with landowners outside of my own place, I highly recommend hiring a licensed applicator to help broadcast and maintain your new seedlings as they're growing, especially for those first 3 years. Having a healthy stand to begin with and taking the time to maintain that is very rewarding in the end. So assessing your timber, we tend to work with forestry consultants, and that is a phenomenal way to go. Most of us in this industry have a pretty good feel for how much timber you have based on the age and the density of your stand. But it's always nice to have a third party give you a timber cruise. that kind of takes the logger out of it, and it separates us away from, you know, having you guess you could say a biased opinion towards it. It gives you an idea on what you could budget for, how much you want to harvest, depending on how much revenue you could potentially make. It also can help you gear towards your taxes. Some people have their finances structured where they can't make over a certain amount of money per year, or it starts to interfere with that. So having a cruise done, knowing what you have for stock, and being able to work with those numbers in mind, even before you have contacted a logger, it sets you up for the first process of really getting into your first operation. And I've kind of touched on the consulting with your county forester. I tend to usually have them come out on a project before I even start and do a pre-job walk. That way, I'm not perfect. There could be things that I miss. There could be things that a consultant misses or a landowner misses, you know, such as endangered species. You could always have an issue with water. And I say issue, but we can usually work around most things, and the foresters are great with working with you and making sure that those are protected. And that's a big thing for us. We want to definitely make sure we're protecting our resources. So I'll kind of touch on vetting a preferred logger. When finding a logger, I always recommend going to a trusted source. As much as I'd love to sit here and tell you that I'm the best logger there's ever been, I'd be dead wrong. There's a lot of good guys out there and gals that do phenomenal work. And the number one thing I tell people when I look at a project, if you don't hire me, that's completely fine. Just make sure that whoever you hire has insurance, has a good reference, the forester signs off and says, yeah, they do good work. That's definitely something that you want to vet. Insurance is a big thing. You know, having just a liability policy doesn't necessarily cut it for most people. You want to see extra insurance for fire. You want to see additional insured on your property. And this kind of goes both ways from landowner to logger. We want to make sure that what we are doing on your property, we are covered as well as you. And that's a very important part. And it also helps to build some trust. You know, if you're not going to hire somebody that you don't trust, and having faith in whoever you hire, it's going to make the project go smooth. You're going to definitely enjoy it more, and it'll be easier for everybody in the long run. The benefits to logging operation, I can't even get out of the truck most of the time without somebody asking me, how much am I going to make on this? And that kind of goes back to the timber cruise. You can make as much or as little as you want depending on the quality and the amount of timber that you have on your property. We specialize in urban logging as well as occasionally doing some larger clear cuts. There's many different options depending on your stand, and the financial benefits can be geared and structured towards what works best for you. I'd say in attracting a logger that wants to look at your property or consider your job, a lot of it has to do with volume, access, and the current market, where we're heading now with the burnt wood, and we're tracking that. There's a lot of variables. Things have been just busy as can be, and I don't really expect to see that slow down much.
No.
But we're working towards trying to help people set up something that we can come back to. So the financial benefit is very important to each side. Your property tax deduction benefit through the county. You know, we are not CPAs. We ask that you consult your CPA during a harvest, or before, preferably, in regards to what your tax liabilities are going to be, your zoning for your land, for your timber deferral, the cost of the logging and cost of additional things in order to accomplish the logging can be utilized towards your additional income, your timber tax, if done correctly and through your CPA. We don't really enjoy repurposing land, but that is something that happens quite frequently, especially in Yamhill County. We're seeing a lot of timber ground turned into vineyard ground, as well as farm field. If you're not able to grow a good stand of trees in a certain area, and you might be able to cut hay on it instead, that's always an option. I think the Yamhill County hills are very flooded with vines, and we've seen a lot of our timber stand in this area go away due to that, especially in the private sector. In this slide, I've got a couple pictures of some stream restoration that we got to take part in for habitat enhancement on the Siletz River. And a lot of times, if you look at some of the logs, they're root wads. There's some big spruce and some hemlock in there that really wasn't suitable for saw logs. And a lot of people would think, oh, we'll just pulp that. There's a lot of options out there as far as what you can do with maybe not the highest quality of log. And this is one that we try to optimize for people. Given the right circumstance and the order that we have, we can repurpose some of these stumps and root balls, as well as just coal logs, and sell those, place them in streams, and enhance habitat. And the logging industry is a very tough industry to be in. It's getting more and more expensive. I've been doing this on my own now since 2017, and it's changed a lot, going from smaller, older equipment to trying to grow into a larger company is extremely expensive, and it's a lot of work, and trying to find these other options to do as well as log. This sort of stuff really helps us out, especially, you know, when we're slow. We can have options like this, opportunities, and it also gives us some good light in the public eye of, you know, I thought loggers, all they did was cut everything down and, you know, just clear cut. Well, no, we do quite a bit with the state, with power companies, with the tribes, big timber companies, as far as trying to enhance habitat wherever we can. And I think that's overlooked, and not a lot of people are aware of what loggers can go out and do besides cut. So I want to just share that with you guys and give you an opportunity to maybe look into that when you're considering logging your place off. Maybe there is some stream logs here that we could repurpose. maybe there's some cabin quality logs. You know, there are a lot of companies that reach out to us that are building log homes. We've sent logs from Wilsonville all the way to New York to be put up on a log cabin in New York. There's different markets, and you know, when considering hiring a logger, it's not just going to go to one mill, and you know, there's definitely options out there. So don't hesitate to ask people when they're looking at what you might be considering harvesting. We'll touch on some thinning. Thinning is an art, and I am not the greatest artist when it comes to thinning. Fortunately, I've got good guys to lean on that can help me in that direction. And it's not a very well practiced thing in this area from what I've seen and from watching some of the larger mills and landowners in the area. And I know with the smaller tree farms, it's extremely important. And I've watched my grandpa, Roger, out in Newburgh, spend 25 years absolutely maintaining and grooming his stands. And I can go and look at a bigger, larger timber company and see, well, they just don't have the time that the small landowner has. And it's extremely important. It needs to be done the right way. It needs to be done at the right time. And you need to have a very good logger do that. We don't want to be scarring up trees. We don't want to be compacting roots. We want to run the right kind of equipment on it during the right time of year. And you don't want to leave giant slash piles out there to breed more habitat for rodents and increase the fire danger. So that's definitely something that we hope to get into, gain some more experience at. And I think it's going to be a higher demand for it as we go in to the next couple years as an industry, trying to gear more towards that, especially with all the fires that we've had. I can see a big demand coming for more thinning. As far as your full scale harvest, for, you know, when your timber's at that optimal range, and you're ready to do a final harvest on it. You know, right now the prices are extremely high. Everybody's jumping to get it done. There's not enough loggers to do it all. And we're starting to see more and more new people come into the game, I guess you could say. And with that, it's becoming more and more competitive. At the same time, with where our economy's at and how fuel prices are increasing, equipment's harder and harder to get, the wait times are longer, equipment's gone up, trucking is going up. The more and more people are pushing for the new green equipment, not just a plug at John Deere, but being able to meet certain criteria for air quality standards. You know, that stuff costs money, and you know, as being a responsible landowner, responsible logger, you know, we have to be able to adapt to those things. I know there's a lot of people that are disgruntled about having to gear towards this DEF compliant equipment and trucks, but we have to be able to meet in the middle on some of this stuff, and we can't argue too hard against protecting the environment. Without trees, we don't have a job, and we definitely take a lot of pride in making sure that we are compliant however we can be, and we want to go towards becoming more greener in our industry, and I think that that's important for the younger generation. I'm not planning on going away anytime soon. I'm just kind of getting started here, so there's not a whole lot of younger generation coming into this, and the older generation of loggers, You know, they're doing their best to help us out and get us geared in the right direction. But things are definitely changing, and we have to be able to adapt to that. I've got some pictures here on the screen that I thought were kind of cool. The one on the left is from Lions Head Fire. We went down and did a couple projects in that area. We're actually on a volunteer project for a Vietnam veteran that was in a bad position as far as getting his property cleaned up. We were approached to see if we wanted to help out, and through a couple other organizations, we were able to help this gentleman out, get his property cleaned up, and the proceeds from all the logging that we did directly went back into the community, went back to fire relief efforts for people affected down in that area. So that was a very good project to be a part of. A lot of good people, made some great friendships that I don't think will ever go away in the process. And those sort of things are happening all the time down there with the fire cleanup, with people coming together to help out. And I wish we could do more of it. We were able to do what we could. And I was just kind of cool to work with that. You can see how close we were to the river. All the trees in the background we ended up taking, and that's been an eye-opener for me. We've always been really cautious about working around water, and with all the fires, they're doing what's called alternate practice through the forestry department. Basically, it is like the wild, wild west when it comes to working down in the burned areas. There's no rules, is how it's perceived, but there is still major restrictions in place where you can save a tree. You're saving a tree if it's not going to impact health or home. We're trying to leave what we can if it's still green, but it's just absolutely devastation down there, and we're really hoping in the next 5 years to see a lot of it cleaned up and replanted. But it's taken a lot of work, a lot of loggers down there. Middle picture is one of our processors that we just picked up. We are one of the first to go with a loader processor head. So this is able to process wood and load it on a truck. It's kind of eliminated a machine and an extra personnel position there. We're able to utilize that extra shovel for a different purpose. So it's kind of a 2-in-1, and we're pretty excited to try that out. We do a lot of land clearing and take down hazard trees. That oak there was just way too hazardous for the area that a lot of our family congregates and camps on the tree farm out in Newburgh. A lot of little kids running around and stuff underneath them, and they were just starting to snap, crackle, pop, and unfortunately they had to go. We don't like to get rid of the old oaks, but we're hoping to save a few. And the bottom corner, I've got my old military all-terrain truck. Not only does it bring back good memories from being in the military, but it's one heck of an all-terrain fire truck. And I've actually spent some time on it with Dan Upton, and the thing will go just about anywhere. So it gives me that extra sense of security knowing that if there is a fire, I can get to it. It's nice to have something that's tall enough to navigate through the stump field. So I've got a picture of my grandpa and my great uncle here that were the original Shaw Bros. Got to give a plug to Boise. I really appreciate your guys' time, and I'm open to any questions if you have any.
All right, you got one. Darcy's asking you, what is the insurance like on the all-terrain water truck?
It's pretty high. No, it's not too horrible, but basic fire coverage, I guess.
Can Isaiah talk about his cut-to-length equipment?
Oh, yeah. We are looking at going that route a little bit more and more. Like I said, with the thinning, there's definitely a high demand for it. As far as the new technology that's out, your tracked 8-wheel Ponzi's and John Deere's, they're pretty lightweight and light environmental impact with navigating a stand. That is definitely on our radar for pursuing, but at this time we're not in a position to acquire that additional equipment.
What is Coffin Wood?
Coffin Wood. All right. So all those big 4.5-foot grouse ladders that are on the outside of your timber stand that would fit on a nice pulp load, they can be rotten. They can be full of white speck. You can have 4 or 5-inch knots on it, stuff that would get kicked out and cold. There's a demand for coffin wood to be exported overseas. And I roughly right now, I'd compare it, your oversized timber market is anywhere from $650 to $750 a thousand we're seeing, and the coffin wood market staying around 600. So when you don't have a pulp market like we're seeing right now, coffin wood is a great alternate to getting rid of it for nothing. You can actually sell it and make some money off of it.
Nicole asks, how about riparian work? You or anyone you work with, what kind of equipment are you able to work with to suit riparian needs? For example, with like fish bearing streams, culverts, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, great question. A lot of times we'll directionally fell out of the RMA, depending on the buffer and, depending on the steepness above those streams and stream crossings. We can utilize a jammer logger. We can utilize a small tower. There's a lot of different options there with equipment. Most of the time we try to fall outside of the RMA and retrieve it outside of that buffer zone.
Do you help with land management planning, or do you just help mostly execute those plans?
We do help with land management. We work with a lot of consulting foresters in that, we try not to get in the way of that when we're hired by a consultant. They've got their head on their shoulders and they're pretty squared away. But as far as a management plan would go, we try to be with the landowner from start to finish, from consulting with the forester to filing your permit, purchase orders, helping with the slash treatment and your replanting needs, as well as providing you with a summary at the end of your project of your millable board feet that was harvested, what kind of timber tract you are in for your tax liability. As far as spraying, we subcontract that out. We recommend periodically having us come out and do just a quick survey, how things are going as far as the growth, making sure that the invasive species are staying away from your seedlings after we've concluded our logging operation. So we try to help you manage it the best that we can. We will write plans and we'll recommend certain other people if we can't help you meet the needs that you're looking for.
Nicole also asks, how much interaction do you have with the landowners typically?
Typically, we get a phone call or an email, start the conversation. We'll take down an address and a name. A lot of times we do research from our computer with Google Image or with Google Maps, Google Earth. We'll go back and see if the property was harvested as far back as we can go with Google Images, and give us an idea with the topography and the lay of the land before we go out. And we typically bring a packet with us that talks or that will show aerial photos, and we like to walk the property with the landowner, identify any waters on site, identify property boundaries. We are very involved from start to finish. Everything is ran through my office. My beautiful wife handles most of that with the purchase order side, and we try to make it a pleasant experience. I mean, this isn't our land. I can't see it from my house. I try to treat every job as if it's my property, and I want to leave it in better shape than I found it, which is very hard to do as when you're logging. But there's a learning curve on some stuff. I've picked up a lot from working with certain people as far as soil compaction, making sure that the soil is kind of fluffed before you pull out and not move back in order to do that in highly traveled areas. And I think it's a very pleasant experience to work closely with a landowner that's engaged in their property, that really that cares about it, that's there every day. You know, we've had landowners want to ride in the shovel for an hour and watch us load a truck, or run through the processor, and those sort of things are really great to see. And we hope that we do a good enough job and build a relationship with them where they'll have us back someday, or my kids can go back and log it someday. So we try to be in it for the long haul.
Terry asks, how do you typically find a timber cruiser?
Well, I know one very well. You can Google quite often timber management companies or timber cruisers. My go-to guy, I'm gonna point him out, is Mr. Upton. He's quite the timber cruiser. Most of our timber cruisers that we've had, we have multiple ones. They're very professional. They take you out in the woods with them. They let you go with them to show you, how they're doing it. Definitely appreciate that opportunity to go with these guys and see how it's done. I mean, we can take a guess very easily. And most of the time we're pretty close with where it comes out with cruising, but it all depends on the density of the stand, the age of the stand. As far as hiring a timber cruiser, the same thing you do with a logger. Make sure you check the references, make sure that you're comfortable with them. There's a lot of guys out there with a hard hat and a pickup and a laptop that think that they're a timber cruiser or a logger. So make sure you vet who you're hiring with your timber cruising and your consultant.
I have a question, Isaiah.
Yes.
We are a small woodlands association, and it is typically more difficult for a small woodland owner to get a logger willing to come onto their property because the mobilization expenses are so great. Is there like a co-op, like a networking with neighbors, or is there incentives that you guys have worked with, or what is the best method? How I do it is because my mom has a large tract and I have a little tract. And so I piggyback on hers, but I'm wondering for other people that have, 10 acres or 15 acres and they just want to get out a couple loads of logs. It's not, where do you go, or what do you recommend to them?
Well, so as far as the small stuff, I mean, that's how we got started, and that's kind of what we still specialize in doing. We run 3 sides. We have a small side with a 130 size excavator. Those sort of smaller projects are attractive to us because they usually entail land clearing or neighboring parties. The unfortunate side to doing the small projects like 3 loads, we have a 3 load minimum where we do not pay anything for the timber unless we meet 3 loads. After that, we negotiate a split or a percentage where we can, get some proceeds back to the landowner. Most of the time, we're going in and doing stuff around houses. We're essentially being tree service, which we have additional insurance to do. We also have to have different equipment to get into those smaller areas. I mean, paved driveways are a huge deterrent for most people because there's a giant liability for trucking the logs out of there, as well as running an 80,000 pound log loader down. So we've got different equipment that has lower PSI on that asphalt, that has different grousers set up that can run on asphalt without destroying it. But those things come at a cost, and it deters people as far as proceeding with doing a small project. We do a lot of them though. And if you do own, 4 or 5 acres and you're taking 1 or 2 loads out a year, it's more of a hobby thing for the landowner, we see. A lot of times people just have a small dozer and they do it themselves. We'll go in and cut the timber and process it and watch them yard it and have a self loader come and grab it.
Uh-huh.
So it all just depends, but like 10 acre, 15 acre pieces, depending on the volume, it's not uncommon for us to move in and do 17 load jobs.
Right.
So you just have to, depending on the quality of the timber and the situation, reflects the cost of it. But moving in a processor and a shovel for 17 loads, it doesn't financially pencil out. So we typically move a shovel in and we have everything hand fell and full manufactured, which is also expensive versus a machine doing 15 to 20 loads a day. You're doing 3 days worth of hard labor, so the cost is more.
Thank you. That's well answered. I was wondering if there was a way that if you encourage the like neighborhood to get together or whatever, because also on the small acreages, when you approach a property line, your neighbors have that potential of having their trees die or do whatever. And so do you typically try to leave a buffer, or when you're dealing with real small properties, what is your recommendation to keep the neighborhood happy?
Well, that's a great question. And we have done a lot of projects in town. Got a lot of attention for it.
Yes, I bet.
We've been used a few times, but not for anything terrible. But definitely doing these in-town jobs. I'll use the city of Sherwood, for example. A lot of small community, or a lot of small towns, that's where I grew up, but Sherwood never adopted the Forestry Practices Act. They do not have a forester on staff, therefore Sherwood doesn't have a tree ordinance. for small landowners inside city limits. And we've done a couple projects in the city of Sherwood for small landowners, 3 to 5 acre properties that they are in timber deferral. And we've come up against a lot of backlash from the community. We've come up, the city has been very difficult to deal with to an extent. But ODF has been behind us 110% because these are the mom and pop little tree farms that they're holdouts. They're not selling to a big subdivision. They're not selling to develop or build the next Walmart. They want to cut their trees and replant them and stay in that little spot they have in town. And in doing this, you irritate a lot of people. And we used to go around door to door and drop a business card off and say, hey, we're going to be logging behind your place. If you have any questions or if there's any issues, please don't hesitate to call. And then the phone rang day and night, and it was upset, disgruntled people. So we don't do that so much anymore in the urban environment. But as far as, your 7 to 10 acre lots outside of Newburgh and, up and down North Valley, we typically go and talk to the neighbor and say, hey, this fence line's been here for 100 years, and do you agree that this is what it is? And we do that with the landowners. And if there's no disagreement on that line and it's clearly visible, either the timber type or the survey markers, if we don't have to get it surveyed, we don't do it. We highly encourage landowners to know where their property lines are, have a survey if you're uncomfortable, and make sure that we actively communicate with the neighbors. A lot of times people are totally fine, and they just don't want to be woke up to a 4-foot tree crashing and shaking them out of bed. It tends to freak people out a little bit. So if you give them some heads up, then it's usually a smooth transaction.
Good, thank
or
you.
You irritate people.
Yes. Well, it's just sometimes they die a year later or whatever too. And so we were like, well, you can use our property to access, for the log trucks or whatever, because we already have the log green roads put in or whatever. I mean, we try to be good neighbors, but I would imagine as a logger that you guys can get into some pretty heated situations. So.
Yeah, and depending on the age of the stand that we're adjacent to, we're going to do what the landowner wants us to do at the end. If the landowner's comfortable with leaving a buffer between, their larger trees and their neighbors' smaller trees, most people don't want to do that because they don't want to restrict their new growth.
Right.
And they don't want to take away from what they're trying to do to please their neighbor. Their neighbor doesn't really have any impact on their property, say, more than, you can swap it back and forth either way. Maybe I cut all my trees and a bunch of my neighbors blow over. If they wanted to access or use my property to help, clean it up or haul some logs over it, by all means, not an issue. But I'm not going to typically encourage people not to cut what they want to cut in order to appease somebody else, other than just being courteous. And that, we do let people know, if you leave all these and you take these out, there's a potential that these have nothing else around them anymore. They're not used to being out on their own. There's a high possibility that they could blow over.
Yeah. Well, you have the habitat trees that you have to leave, right? Is that true in town also, or just in a rural property?
It depends on the zone that you're in. Depends on the size of the clear cut you're doing. We leave wildlife trees occasionally at the landowner's request. Most of the time when we're doing like a 54 to 60 acre clear cut, you have to have a certain, I believe it's 2 trees per acre for wildlife trees. And we can consolidate those anywhere on the property that you would like to, other than the really big ones that, they'll most likely blow over. the smaller ones will most likely blow over. The bigger ones, they've stood on their own for quite a while in those smaller stands that we see. And we typically leave those for natural reseeding. I mean, birds, just like everybody else, get tired. They need a place to sit. So we try to give them a nice perch and a clear cut to hunt from. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers anything.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you.
I did have one thing I wanted to mention as far as small woodland owners in Washington County. We're running into some issues with logging in Washington County right now as far as the slash treatment goes, and this has been kind of a uphill battle for a lot of loggers and landowners over the last 5 years. It's gotten pretty difficult with treatment of slash. Typically, we pile and burn. And in Washington County, you're no longer allowed to burn logging slash. You cannot burn it whatsoever. That's been put out from DEQ, and we actually are meeting with DEQ coming up here very shortly to try and put our 2 cents into why this is affecting our business and our small landowners. You know, you're breeding a lot of ground for rodents. You're creating more of a fire hazard by not being able to get rid of the slash. And at the same time, you're also taking away valuable planting space. And these 2 to 3 acre lots in town, these people can't burn. So you have to spend quite a bit of money to bring in a tub grinder, grind the chips, then pay to haul the chips off because no one's purchasing chips anymore. And that's going to be an issue for a lot of small timber owners that live in Washington County. You can't get a permit to burn. ODF will not give you authorization to burn, and it's anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 fine if you're burning logging slash in Washington County. So that's
how new is that? Is that like a 2019 or 2020 rule, or has it been longer than that?
It's been since about 2017. Yeah, since 2017. It's complaint driven. We actually just logged a piece up in the Sherwood area, and we had an issue with. This is why this is being brought about, and I'm starting to really try to dig my heels into it. DEQ is threatening to fine us $15,000 for burning slash on 3 acres. We were not fined, and by not being fined, now we have a meeting with the head of DEQ to try and come to some sort of solution to see what we can do for these landowners to help them, alleviate the slash, whether there's got to be some sort of subsidized program from DEQ that helps the landowner. Because all you can do is tub grind it. And that's a large expense. You take $25,000 worth of timber off your property and you spend $18,000 grinding it. Why log it? So you're discouraging people from logging their properties. You're creating a financial hardship for them to clean it up after they log it. You're creating a fire hazard. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to try to go to bat for small mom and pops. I'm not talking about clearing 10, 15 acres for the next target. I'm talking about small guys and girls. I'm going to try to do something about it, but there's been a lot of people that have tried, and it's not going to get any easier. It's not going to go away anytime soon. If anything, it's going to get more restrictive.
Yes.
So trying to be proactive and meet in the middle. That's what we have to do.